All right, so I want to talk about pokeweed today, which is a really cool native plant. You may be familiar with it. These are what the berries look like at the end of summer, early fall. And I think it's a really pretty plant. Some people might disagree with me, but whatever. The berries are a really important food source for lots of different bird species, and that's pretty much how this plant gets around. Is birds eat the berries and they poop out the seeds, and so this pokeweed is pretty good at getting around on its own. They can grow in pretty poor soils, and so like I said, they get around. They are perennial, and the stems can get pretty large and woody in their first year, which is cool. Here you can see I'm processing some pokeweed seeds, and I'll get into more of that in a little bit. But I'm basically just using a paint mixer on a drill to mash up some of the berries in water. And this is, pretty standard wet seed saving stuff. You can see this is what the seeds look like. They're jet black and, in my opinion, very pretty. And yeah, so I'll get into why I'm saving seed in a minute. But just a few more things on pokeweed, right? Is that most, if not all, parts of the plant are very toxic to humans. In some cultures, there is a tradition of eating pokeweed, but it has to be picked at a very specific time and prepared in a very specific way. And I'm not educated on how to do that. So, if you want to get into that, make sure you do some research because you could definitely hurt yourself. But I think it's important to mention that that is something that certain cultures do, right? That is a tradition that people have figured out how to do. And anyway, I'm really into pokeweed. You may be wondering why I'm saving the seeds because I said it gets around really well on its own. And if you live somewhere where pokeweed, is native, you probably have seen like, yeah, this stuff is everywhere. It doesn't really seem like it needs our help. Well, it probably doesn't. But I'm trying to use pokeweed in a very specific role to assist in the establishment of young trees. I'm trying to plant out a lot of trees, on this landscape. And in doing so, I'm trying to think, what are the plants that can help me out in that process? What plants want to be there with the trees to help that ecosystem move through succession? Because we're basically going from death, bare ground, or turf grass with nothing going on. And I'm trying to move towards a more savanna or forest like system with all these trees. And the basic gist is that young trees do not play around well. They don't get on well with lots of grass competition. They don't thrive if there's a lot of grass. And so they do tend to thrive when they're around a lot of other woody perennials or even herbaceous plants. And so I think plants like pokeweed, maybe dog fennel, and many, many, many others, which are less than 6 feet tall, cast a somewhat dappled shade, and are early successional. I think these are plants that would do well, in hedgerows or anywhere where you're trying to establish a lot of young trees. They can help keep the grass at bay. They can help improve the soil, right? And they can cast a little bit of shade while those trees are getting established, but they're short enough that the trees can, in a few years, get their trunks up above that foliage and start capturing more sunlight on their own. So I'm saving pokeweed seeds so that I can get out there and try to intentionally put it in certain spots. And like I said, it's really like any other wet seed saving project where you're going to mash up the fruit either by hand, with your feet, with a paint mixer, whatever. I don't find that they need to be fermented, the way that you ferment tomato seeds. You can just kind of mix them up and then immediately start processing, where you're basically adding in that water, mixing it up, letting the seeds sink to the bottom, and then you're going to pour that water off, and hopefully you should be just left with seeds. You'll have to do this many times to get the seed really clean. You can get it as clean as you want. And I find screens sometimes help, like sometimes using a screen like what I'm pointing at right now, which is big enough to let seeds fall through, but it catches a lot of the chaff. That can be useful. Or sometimes using a screen that's small enough to catch all the seeds. When you get down to that last part where you mostly just have clean seeds in the bottom of the bucket. Screens of varying sizes can be really helpful in all seed saving projects. And like with all seed saving projects, I think it's a good idea to do most of your seed saving work in a place where if you do spill some seeds, you're out somewhere where the seeds might have a chance to grow. I think that's kind of always a good practice. We're under the barn here where they couldn't grow, but I'm just kind of showing the screens. I'm not doing a lot of the processing under here. So some considerations there. Another thing too is, if you don't want to go through all this effort of seed saving, you could just take pokeweed berries and scatter them around, where you want them to grow. And you're kind of just mimicking what the birds do. I think that would probably work as well. And I will say too, I have a silly amount of pokeweed seeds. If for whatever reason you want some pokeweed seeds, reach out and I could start distributing these through the nursery if there's an interest for them. I have some. That's not really my main intention. Like I said, I'm kind of just trying to grow these on my own. But yeah, let me know if you're interested, and we could maybe figure something out. It's also worth noting that when you're doing this liquid wet seed saving process with poke, you get this beautiful liquid, and that probably could be used as a dye. I don't really know much of anything about dyes or how to use pokeweed as a dye, but I would imagine you could. So if you're into that, maybe look into it.